I came home 30 minutes earlier than usual. The house was still. That type of unsettling quiet that makes you think you've stepped into the wrong place, like something isn't quite right. I set my keys down on the kitchen counter, listening to the faint hum of the refrigerator, but nothing else. No TV, no music, not even the sound of Jennifer moving around in the house. At first, I thought she might have fallen asleep after work, exhausted from her usual long day. The bedroom door was slightly ajar, a sliver of warm light escaping into the hallway. I moved toward it, intending to quietly close it when I heard voices. I froze. It wasn't just her voice, it was lower, rougher, familiar. That voice belonged to someone I knew, someone I trusted. Dr. Robert, our family doctor. The man who'd been over for dinner countless times, who knew our lives inside and out. I couldn't hear the exact words, but the tone was unmistakable. Low, hushed, intimate. The kind of conversation you only have when you think no one else is listening. My pulse quickened, and for a moment, my brain refused to process what was happening. Maybe this was just some misunderstanding. Maybe they were discussing something medical. But then I saw them. Through the crack in the door, I saw Jennifer, my wife, on the bed, her hand resting on his chest. Robert's hand gently brushed her cheek, and I watched as they leaned into each other, their lips meeting with an unmistakable hunger. My heart stopped. I felt like I'd been gutted, my insides ripped out in one savage motion. I wanted to burst through the door, to scream, to tear them apart. But something held me back. I don't know if it was shock or rage, or perhaps something darker, something more calculated. I stepped back, quietly moving down the hallway before either of them noticed me. I couldn't confront them. Not yet. No, this needed to be handled differently. If I exploded right there, it would all be over in an instant. But that wasn't enough. They needed to feel the pain I was feeling, slowly, thoroughly. They needed to have everything they cherished stripped away, just like they were doing to me, piece by piece. As I reached the kitchen, I stared out the window into the darkening sky, my mind racing with possibilities. Jennifer thought she could betray me, thought she could carry on like this without consequence. But she had no idea what was coming. No idea how much I knew. This wasn't going to be a momentary explosion of anger that she could cry her way out of. No, I was going to break her life apart in ways she couldn't even imagine. Starting with her friends, the people she valued the most, the people she leaned on. I'd make sure she felt alone, desperate, just like I did. And when the time came, when there was nothing left for her to cling to, I'd let her know just how long I'd been watching. How long I'd known. The door to the bedroom clicked shut, and their muffled voices faded into the background. My hands clenched into fists, but I forced myself to relax. This was just the beginning. It's funny how easily I slipped into pretending everything was fine. The next morning, Jennifer came downstairs, her usual warm smile plastered across her face like nothing had changed. She kissed me on the cheek, and I let her. She made coffee, asked about my day at work, and I played my part, the loyal, unsuspecting husband. But now, every word she said felt like a lie. Every look, every touch was tainted. It was almost laughable how easily she assumed I knew nothing. How blind she was to the fact that I had already begun laying the groundwork for her downfall. First, I needed to know who mattered most to her, who would be the key to unraveling her little world. Over breakfast, I casually brought up Amanda. I was thinking we should invite Amanda and Greg over sometime soon, I said, glancing at Jennifer over my cup of coffee. Amanda had been her best friend since college, and they shared everything. Or so I had thought. Oh, I'm not sure, Jennifer replied, her eyes flicking to the side. Amanda's been going through a rough time lately. She and Greg aren't doing too well. Maybe we should give them some space. I nodded, pretending to agree, but inside, I knew this was exactly where I needed to start. Amanda was vulnerable. She and Greg had been on the rocks for months. If I played this right, I could worm my way into Amanda's trust, into her life. And when the time was right, I'd use her to strike at Jennifer in the most painful way possible. The next weekend, I ran into Amanda accidentally at the grocery store. She looked frazzled, her eyes puffy like she hadn't slept in days. "Hey, Amanda," I said, my voice full of concern. "You look like you could use a break. Everything okay?" She forced a smile, but I could see the cracks in her facade. "Oh, just life, you know? Greg and it's been tough." I nodded sympathetically, carefully masking the satisfaction I felt. "If you ever need to talk, you know I'm here, right?" We've known each other for years. Don't hesitate to reach out. She hesitated for a moment, then let out a sigh. Thanks, George. Honestly, I might take you up on that. Bingo. It didn't take long for Amanda to start texting me late at night, venting about Greg. How he didn't understand her, how distant he had become. I listened, always there with the right words, offering comfort. It wasn't hard to play the part of a supportive friend. I made sure Jennifer saw the texts occasionally. Left my phone unlocked just enough for her to notice Amanda's name pop up. I needed her to start wondering, to start doubting. A few weeks passed, and Amanda invited me over one afternoon to talk. Jennifer was at work, and I had the day off, so I went. When I arrived, Amanda was clearly a wreck. She poured us both glasses of wine, and before I knew it, she was pouring out her soul. I don't know how it all went wrong, she said, tears spilling down her cheeks. He doesn't care anymore. I feel so alone. I leaned forward, resting my hand on hers, giving her the comfort she desperately sought. You're not alone, Amanda. You've got people who care about you. People who see your worth. Our eyes locked, and at that moment, I knew I had her. It wasn't long before the wine and the emotions took over, and she kissed me. I could feel the guilt bubbling up in her, but I didn't stop her. This was all part of the plan. One more nail in the coffin of Jennifer's perfect life. By the time I left Amanda's house that evening, I knew the seed had been planted. I could see the regret in her eyes, the confusion. But I also knew she wouldn't tell Jennifer. Not yet. She'd keep this secret buried. Just like Jennifer kept hers. And when the time came, I would let them both drown in their lies. As I drove home, I thought about what would come next. Amanda was just the first domino. I'd already started setting my sights on Jennifer's colleague, Stephanie, another friend who thought she knew Jennifer inside and out. Little did she know how easily she'd fall into my web. When I got home, Jennifer was there, sitting on the couch, scrolling through her phone. She looked up at me and smiled. Oblivious as ever. How was your day? She asked, her tone sweet, innocent. I smiled back. It was productive. And in my mind, I could already see the next steps unfolding. The satisfaction from my encounter with Amanda lingered for days. She had fallen right into my trap, and I knew it was only a matter of time before her guilt would eat her alive. But I wasn't finished. This was just the start of Jennifer's unraveling. Amanda was the first step in isolating her, but I needed more. The destruction had to be complete. Next on my list was Stephanie. Stephanie and Jennifer had been working together for years. They weren't as close as Jennifer was with Amanda, but there was mutual respect between them. More importantly, Stephanie had always been ambitious and eager to climb the corporate ladder. That ambition was her weakness, and I intended to exploit it. Jennifer often talked about Stephanie's frustrations at work, and about how she felt overlooked and undervalued. I could sense the resentment building. It wouldn't take much to turn Stephanie against her, to create a rift between them. One afternoon, I arranged to meet Stephanie for coffee. I framed it as a casual, friendly meeting. I was just the supportive husband, concerned about Jennifer's work environment and curious to hear how things were going. So, how's everything at work? I asked after we settled into our seats at the cafe. I kept my tone light and casual, as though I wasn't actively plotting to manipulate her. Stephanie rolled her eyes, taking a sip of her latte. Same old, same old. You know how it is. Jennifer's doing great, as always. Meanwhile, I'm stuck at the same level, busting my ass without any recognition. I nodded, pretending to sympathize. It must be frustrating, especially when you work just as hard, if not harder. Her eyes flashed with irritation, and I knew I'd hit a nerve. Exactly. I mean, I don't want to sound bitter, but sometimes it feels like Jennifer gets all the breaks. She's always in the right place at the right time. I leaned in slightly, lowering my voice as if sharing a secret. You know, I've always thought you deserved more credit than you get. Jennifer's great, sure, but you got something special. If people really saw that, you'd be way ahead. Stephanie blinked, surprised by my words. I could see the wheels turning in her head, the tiny spark of resentment flaring into something bigger. I was feeding it, nurturing it. I don't know, she said hesitantly. I just feel like I'm always stuck in her shadow. You shouldn't be, I replied, my voice firm. You've got too much potential to be held back. Maybe it's time to look out for yourself a little more. She smiled at me, a hint of appreciation in her eyes. I could tell she was starting to believe me, starting to see Jennifer as an obstacle rather than a friend. It wouldn't be long before she began to act on that resentment. As I left the cafe, I felt a surge of satisfaction. Stephanie was just as vulnerable as Amanda had been, and soon, Jennifer would feel the sting of betrayal from her own workplace. I returned home that evening, greeted by Jennifer's usual affectionate smile. She had no idea the storm that was brewing around her. She couldn't see the cracks forming in her carefully constructed life. But soon, she would. I could see it in Amanda's eyes the next time I saw her, the guilt. It had started to fester, turning her from the confident woman Jennifer once knew into a nervous wreck. She couldn't meet my gaze, and every time Jennifer mentioned her, Amanda flinched as if burned by her name. I played my part perfectly, never once giving Amanda a reason to suspect that I was anything other than a caring, supportive friend. The texts between us became less frequent, but I knew she was spiraling. The guilt over her affair with me weighed on her, but the fear of Jennifer finding out kept her locked in silence. Exactly where I wanted her. It didn't take long for Jennifer to notice something was off. Amanda's been acting so strange lately, Jennifer said one evening as we sat in the living room. She's distant, distracted. I don't know what's going on with her. I shrugged, pretending not to care. Maybe she's still dealing with her problems with Greg. Maybe, Jennifer said, though I could tell she wasn't convinced. I should check on her. I fought the urge to smile. Jennifer had no idea she was walking into a web of lies and deceit that I had woven. I didn't need to intervene anymore. Amanda was on the verge of a breakdown, and it was only a matter of time before she cracked. A few days later, it happened. Jennifer came home, her face pale, her eyes wide with disbelief. I was sitting at the kitchen table, casually flipping through the mail when she stormed in. "You won't believe what Amanda just told me," she said, her voice shaking with anger and confusion. I looked up, feigning concern. "What happened?" She admitted that she'd kissed someone else," Jennifer stammered. "Someone who isn't Greg." I raised an eyebrow, pretending to be shocked. "Seriously? Amanda? She wouldn't tell me who it was," Jennifer continued, pacing back and forth across the kitchen. "But she was a wreck. She said she didn't know what to do, that she felt horrible, and that she couldn't live with the guilt anymore." I leaned back in my chair, silently reveling in the chaos I had unleashed. Amanda had finally broken, confessing just enough to Jennifer to spark doubt, but not enough to reveal my involvement. "Perfect. What are you going to do?" I asked, knowing full well that Jennifer would have no idea how to handle the situation. "I don't know," she cried, running her hands through her hair. "I can't believe she'd do something like this. I mean, she's my best friend. How could she betray Greg like that? And why won't she tell me who it was with?" I stood up and walked over to her, placing a hand on her shoulder. "Maybe she's too ashamed to admit it. You should give her some time. She'll come around eventually." Jennifer nodded, but I could see the confusion and hurt in her eyes. She didn't know how to process what Amanda had done, and it was driving a wedge between them. Just as I had planned. As Jennifer retreated to the bedroom that night, her mind consumed by Amanda's betrayal, I sat back and allowed myself a brief moment of satisfaction. The first part of my revenge was complete. Jennifer was starting to see her world fall apart, and she still had no idea that I was the one pulling the strings. But soon, she would. This was only the beginning. Jennifer's worry over Amanda lingered for days. She tried to reach out to her, but Amanda grew more distant, her guilt eating away at her every time they spoke. I watched the tension between them grow, knowing I had successfully driven a wedge into their friendship. But I wasn't satisfied. Jennifer's unraveling had only just begun. It was time to focus on the next target, Stephanie. I hadn't spoken to Stephanie since our coffee meeting. But that wasn't an accident. I knew she would need time to stew in her own resentment. Jennifer, oblivious to the shift, continued to vent about work, mentioning how Stephanie had seemed more competitive lately, more eager to prove herself. "She's been strange at work," Jennifer said one evening, leaning against the kitchen counter as I prepared dinner. "It's like she's trying to undermine me, constantly suggesting new ideas during meetings, trying to make me look unprepared." I acted surprised, carefully planting the seeds of doubt. "That doesn't sound like Stephanie. You think she's doing it on purpose?" Jennifer frowned, twirling a strand of hair between her fingers. "I don't know. She's never been like this before, but lately. I don't know what's gotten into her." I kept my response neutral, allowing Jennifer to draw her own conclusions. I knew she would start to see Stephanie as a threat, someone trying to take her down at work. This was exactly the kind of pressure I needed to build, tension at home with Amanda. And now tension at work with Stephanie. It was time for me to push things further. I arranged another meeting with Stephanie, under the guise of catching up about Jennifer. I suggested we meet for drinks after work, which she eagerly accepted, no doubt hoping for more sympathy and validation. When I arrived at the bar, Stephanie was already there, sipping a cocktail and looking more stressed than before. "Rough day?" I asked, sliding into the seat next to her. "You could say that," she muttered, taking a long sip of her drink. "It's Jennifer. She's been acting like she's the only one with ideas at work. It's getting frustrating." I nodded sympathetically. "I've noticed that too. I'm sure she doesn't mean to, but Jennifer can be a little overpowering sometimes, especially when it comes to her career." Stephanie's expression hardened. "Exactly. She acts like she's the only one who matters. I'm tired of being in her shadow." I leaned back, feigning thoughtfulness. "You deserve better than that. Stephanie, you've worked just as hard, maybe even harder. It's time people started seeing that." Her eyes flickered with something close to gratitude, and I knew she was starting to see Jennifer as an obstacle, not a friend. "You're right. I've been too nice for too long." I smiled, knowing I had nudged her in the right direction. "Look out for yourself, Stephanie. You've got the talent. Don't let anyone stand in your way." We spent the next hour talking, and by the end of it, I knew I had planted the final seeds of doubt in Stephanie's mind. She would go back to work more competitively, more determined to outshine Jennifer. The growing hostility between them would drive Jennifer to question her own instincts, making her feel paranoid and isolated. As I left the bar that evening, I could already see the pieces falling into place. Jennifer's world was starting to close in around her. Amanda's collapse, Stephanie's ambition, the subtle distance creeping into her life. It was all part of my plan. When I got home, Jennifer was sitting on the couch. Her eyes glued to her phone, frowning. She didn't even look up when I walked in. "What's up?" I asked, keeping my tone casual. "It's Amanda," she sighed. "She's been avoiding me again. I don't know what to do. Every time I try to talk to her, she shuts down." I sat down next to her, offering a comforting touch. "Give her some time. She's going through a lot." Jennifer nodded, but I could see the frustration building. She was losing control of her friendships, her work, her life. And it was only going to get worse. Later that night, as I lay in bed next to her, I thought about how perfectly everything was playing out. Jennifer's world was unraveling, and she still hadn't figured out that I was the one behind it all. She trusted me and relied on me, and that trust would be her downfall. I wasn't done yet. Stephanie was just the next domino. Soon, Jennifer would realize that everyone she thought she could count on was slipping away. And by the time she figured it out, it would be too late. The cracks in Jennifer's life were deepening. Amanda had pulled away completely, retreating into her guilt and confusion. Stephanie, on the other hand, had become more aggressive at work, subtly undermining Jennifer at every opportunity. Each day, Jennifer came home more exhausted and more frustrated, her once confident demeanor unraveling right in front of me. I watched it all, carefully keeping my own mask in place. At home, I was the loving husband, the one person she thought she could still rely on. But that was exactly where I wanted her, alone. Desperate for stability, and completely unaware that I was the one who had set everything into motion. One evening, as we sat at the dinner table, I noticed the weariness in her eyes. She barely touched her food, her mind clearly elsewhere. "You okay?" I asked, pretending to be concerned. Jennifer let out a long sigh, pushing her plate aside. "I don't know. It's just, everything feels like it's falling apart. Amanda won't talk to me, Stephanie's been acting like she wants my job, and work has been hell. I feel like I'm losing control of everything." I leaned forward, putting on my best supportive expression. "It's probably just a rough patch. These things happen. Maybe it's time to take a step back and focus on yourself for a bit." She shook her head. "I can't. There's too much at stake right now. If I back off, I'll lose everything I've worked for." Her voice cracked slightly, and I could see the fear in her eyes. She was terrified of losing her grip on the life she had built, the perfect image she had spent years maintaining. But the truth was, she was already losing it, piece by piece, friendship by friendship. "Maybe you should talk to Amanda again," I suggested, knowing full well it would only add more strain. "She's your best friend. If anyone can help you through this, it's her." Jennifer hesitated, clearly torn between her frustration and the desire to fix things. I've tried. She won't even respond to my calls anymore. I'm sure she'll come around, I said, offering her a comforting smile. Just give it time. Jennifer nodded, but I could tell she wasn't convinced. The isolation was taking hold, and soon, she would have no one left to turn to but me. I could feel her trust slipping through her fingers, and I was the only one holding on. The following week, I decided to push things further with Stephanie. I knew that Jennifer was becoming increasingly suspicious of her colleague, and I intended to make sure those suspicions grew into full-blown paranoia. I invited Stephanie to lunch again, this time steering the conversation toward Jennifer's work. I casually mentioned how Jennifer had been feeling overwhelmed, subtly suggesting that maybe she wasn't handling things as well as she seemed. Jennifer's been really stressed lately, I said, keeping my tone light. She's been talking about how much pressure she's under at work. I think it's starting to get to her. Stephanie raised an eyebrow, clearly intrigued. Really? She's never mentioned it to me. She always seems like she has everything under control. I shrugged, pretending to be nonchalant. Maybe she's just good at hiding it. But from what she's told me, things haven't been going as smoothly as they seem. Stephanie's eyes flickered with a mixture of curiosity and ambition. I could see her mind working, wondering if Jennifer was starting to crack under the pressure. It was exactly the kind of doubt I needed to plant. Well, Stephanie said, leaning back in her chair. I guess everyone has their limits. I smiled, knowing that the seed of doubt had taken root. Soon, Stephanie would start pushing harder, testing Jennifer's limits at work. And Jennifer, already fraying at the edges, would crumble under the pressure. By the time I got home that evening, I could sense the shift in the air. Jennifer was quieter than usual, her mind clearly racing with thoughts she wasn't sharing. She was beginning to suspect that something wasn't right, that her life was spiraling out of control. But she still had no idea that I was the one pulling the strings. The next few weeks were a whirlwind of tension. Jennifer's frustration with Stephanie grew daily, and the once friendly competition between them had turned into an all-out Cold War. At home, Jennifer was distant, distracted, barely speaking to me as her mind was consumed with work and the fractures in her friendships. Amanda, of course, had all but disappeared. She had stopped answering Jennifer's calls entirely, and Jennifer's repeated attempts to reach out only seemed to push Amanda further away. It was painful to watch, for her. For me, it was exactly what I had intended. One night, Jennifer came home late, her face pale and drawn. She barely acknowledged me as she walked into the kitchen, pouring herself a glass of wine before sinking into the couch. I could tell something had happened at work, something big. Rough day? I asked, sitting down next to her. She took a long sip of wine before answering, her voice barely above a whisper. Stephanie's trying to take my job. I feigned surprise. What? Are you sure? Jennifer nodded, her eyes filling with anger. She's been undercutting me in meetings, pushing her own ideas, and today, she pitched a project to our boss that I've been working on for weeks. And he loved it. He gave her the green light, completely ignoring everything I've done. I could see the desperation in her eyes, the fear that her entire career was slipping away. I don't know what to do, George, she said, her voice shaking. I feel like I'm losing everything. Amanda won't talk to me. And now Stephanie's trying to take over at work. I'm completely alone. I put a hand on her shoulder, offering her the comfort she so desperately needed. You're not alone. I'm here. She leaned into me, and for a moment, I almost felt sorry for her. Almost. But then I remembered the image of her and Robert, the betrayal that had started all of this. And any sympathy I might have felt vanished. Jennifer stayed quiet for a long time after that, sipping her wine and staring off into space. I knew the weight of everything was starting to crush her, and soon, she would break. It was only a matter of time. The next day, I decided it was time to confront Dr. Robert. I had let his affair with Jennifer go on long enough, and now that she was on the verge of collapse, I needed to make sure he played his part in her downfall. I scheduled an appointment under the guise of a routine checkup, but when I arrived at his office, I had no intention of talking about my health. Robert greeted me with his usual professional smile, completely unaware of what was about to happen. As we sat in his office, I wasted no time getting to the point. I know about you and Jennifer, I said, my voice cold and steady. Robert's smile faltered, his face turning pale. I don't know what you're talking about. I leaned forward, locking eyes with him. Don't play dumb. I know everything. The affair, the lies. I've known for months. He swallowed hard, his hands trembling slightly. George, I never meant for this to happen. It was a mistake. I smirked, enjoying the panic in his eyes. A mistake? No, Robert. A mistake is forgetting your keys. What you did was a choice. But don't worry, I'm not here to cause a scene. He looked confused, unsure of what I meant. Then, what do you want? I leaned back in my chair, my expression calm. What I want is for you to stay out of this. Jennifer's life is falling apart, and I intend to make sure it continues to do so. You can either step aside and let it happen, or I can make sure your career ends along with hers. Robert stared at me, his mouth opening and closing as he struggled to find the right words. But I could see the fear in his eyes, the realization that he was trapped. I'll stay out of it, he finally said, his voice barely above a whisper. I stood up, satisfied. Good. Now, don't say a word to her. She doesn't need to know we had this conversation. As I left Robert's office, I felt a sense of control wash over me. Jennifer's world was crumbling, and now even Robert was out of the picture. Everything was falling into place. Jennifer had no idea how deep her isolation had become. She was spiraling, torn between her crumbling friendships, the growing hostility at work, and her deepening sense of betrayal. As her life fell apart, she clung to me more and more. I was the last thing holding her together, but I knew that wouldn't last. The days that followed my confrontation with Robert were tense. Every time Jennifer came home, I could see her frayed nerves, the anxiety gnawing at her. Her phone buzzed less frequently now, no more calls from Amanda, no texts from colleagues. Even the workplace meetings she had once commanded with confidence seemed like a minefield she couldn't navigate anymore. She hadn't heard from Robert since my visit either, but I said nothing about it, letting her confusion build. One evening, she came home earlier than usual, her face pale, her movements erratic. I could tell she had reached a breaking point. I can't do this anymore, George, she said, sinking onto the couch, tears forming in her eyes. I sat beside her, offering the same steady, fake sympathy I had perfected. What's wrong? Everything is falling apart, she choked out. I'm losing Amanda. I'm losing Stephanie. And today, the project I've been working on for months. Stephanie took all the credit. She's practically running the show now. I kept my expression neutral, letting her vent. Have you talked to your boss? Explained what's happening. Jennifer shook her head, her voice trembling with helplessness. I tried, but he just brushed me off. He doesn't believe me. He thinks I'm overreacting. He thinks Stephanie is doing a great job. This was exactly what I had hoped for. I had turned her closest friends and colleagues into enemies in her eyes, and now even her superiors didn't trust her. Her career was slipping away, and I could see the panic setting in. I don't know who to trust anymore, she whispered, burying her face in her hands. That was my cue. I gently placed a hand on her shoulder, pretending to be the supportive husband she so desperately needed. You still have me. I'm here for you, no matter what. She looked up at me, her eyes full of desperation, and I knew that she had no one left but me. It was almost pathetic how easily she had fallen into my trap. I don't know what I'd do without you, she said, her voice barely a whisper. I smiled inwardly, knowing that I had her exactly where I wanted her. But I wasn't done yet. There was still one more piece to play, one final secret that would shatter her completely. The next day, I decided it was time to bring Robert back into the picture, just not in the way Jennifer expected. I had been planning this move for weeks, and now that she was on the verge of collapse, it was the perfect time. I made a call to Robert, not to confront him again but to set up a meeting, this time with Jennifer. Jennifer's been struggling, I told him over the phone. I think it's time you two talked. She needs to hear the truth. Robert was hesitant, but I pressed him, reminding him that he was just as guilty in all of this as Jennifer was. After a long pause, he agreed to meet her. The plan was simple. I would arrange for Jennifer to meet Robert at a nearby cafe. She would go in thinking it was an ordinary coffee date with an old friend, but Robert would be there to confess everything, about their affair, about how he had ended it, about how he had been complicit in the destruction of her life. I told Robert to be honest, to tell her exactly what she needed to hear. But I didn't tell Jennifer anything. She would walk in completely unaware, and the betrayal would hit her like a tidal wave. As the meeting approached, I could feel the anticipation building. This was it, the final strike. After this, there would be no going back. The morning of the meeting, Jennifer was quieter than usual. She had no idea what was waiting for her at the cafe, no idea that Robert was going to lay it all out for her. I had set up the meeting without her knowing, pretending it was just another casual suggestion to get her out of the house, to give her some space to clear her mind. She took the bait. Maybe you should go grab coffee today, I said that morning as she sat at the kitchen table, staring blankly into her cup. Take a break. You've been stressed lately. She nodded absently, not even questioning the suggestion. Yeah, maybe I should. I knew exactly what time she would arrive, what time Robert would be there. Waiting, I could picture the scene perfectly in my head, the shock on her face, the realization that her entire world had been a lie. As she left the house, I felt a sense of exhilaration. This was the moment I had been waiting for. I spent the next few hours imagining what would happen, and how Jennifer would react when Robert told her everything. I could see her heart breaking, the betrayal cutting deep. I could almost hear her desperate questions, the panic in her voice as the truth came crashing down on her. Hours later, she came home. When the door opened, I looked up from the couch, expecting to see her broken, devastated by the confession. But what I saw was worse than I had imagined. Jennifer stood in the doorway, her face pale, her eyes hollow, as though the life had been drained out of her. She didn't speak, didn't even acknowledge me. She simply walked past me, heading straight for the bedroom. Jennifer? I called after her, keeping my voice gentle and concerned. She didn't respond. I followed her to the bedroom, where she was sitting on the edge of the bed, staring down at her hands. For a moment, I wasn't sure what to say. I had expected a confrontation, an outburst of anger, but this was something else entirely. Finally, she spoke, her voice low and shaky. He told me everything. I nodded slowly, sitting down beside her. I'm so sorry. She shook her head, tears spilling down her cheeks. I don't even know who I am anymore. How could I have let this happen? How could I have been so stupid? I could hear the despair in her voice, the complete and utter loss of control. She was broken, and there was no coming back from this. You're not stupid, I said softly, keeping my voice calm and steady. You made a mistake, but you can move past it. She looked at me, her eyes filled with guilt and pain. I don't deserve you, George. After everything I've done, I don't deserve any of this. I smiled inwardly, knowing that I had won. She was at rock bottom, completely destroyed, and now she was clinging to me. The very person who had orchestrated her downfall. But I didn't let any of that show. I simply put my arms around her, pulling her close. You don't have to do this alone. I'm here for you, no matter what. She sobbed into my shoulder, completely unaware that the very person she was relying on was the one who had set the entire collapse in motion. I had taken everything from her, her friends, her career, her sense of self. And now, all that was left was me. Jennifer had nowhere else to go. She was mine, and the game was finally over. Jennifer's breakdown wasn't immediate, but it was inevitable. After that meeting with Robert, she became a shell of the woman she once was. She walked around the house like a ghost, her eyes hollow, her words few and far between. I watched her closely, every day waiting for her to completely unravel. Her career was in free fall. Stephanie had all but taken over her role at work, and Jennifer was powerless to stop it. Amanda remained out of the picture, cutting all ties with her. The rest of her friends drifted away too, either because of my manipulation or simply because they sensed something was wrong. Jennifer had been untouchable for so long, but now, she was vulnerable, weak. People could smell it on her. But despite everything, she clung to me. The guilt over her affair with Robert had consumed her, and now she saw me as her only salvation. It was almost laughable. She was the one who had betrayed me, but now she was desperate for my forgiveness. She wanted to make things right with me, even as her life fell apart around her. One evening, I found her sitting alone in the dark living room, staring blankly at the TV that wasn't even on. The only sound in the room was the ticking of the clock on the wall. Hey, I said softly, sitting down next to her. You okay? She didn't respond at first, her eyes fixed on some invisible point in the distance. Then, after what felt like an eternity, she spoke. I don't know who I am anymore, she whispered. Her voice barely audible. Everything I thought I was, everything I built, it's all gone. I reached for her hand, pretending to be the caring husband she needed. You're still you, Jennifer. You've just been through a lot. Things will get better. She shook her head, her voice shaking. No, they won't. I've lost everything. My friends, my job, you. I don't even know if you can ever forgive me for what I did. This was the moment I had been waiting for, the moment when she would beg for my forgiveness. Desperate to hold on to the one thing she thought she could still control. But I wasn't ready to let her off the hook just yet. Not after everything she had put me through. I don't know, Jennifer, I said, keeping my tone measured. What you did, it hurt. A lot. She broke down then, tears streaming down her face as she clutched my hand like it was the only thing keeping her from drowning. I'm sorry, George. I'm so sorry. I was stupid, I was selfish, but I love you. I love you more than anything. And I'll do whatever it takes to make this right. I didn't respond right away. I let her sob, let her feel the weight of everything she had done. She needed to understand just how much she had destroyed, and how much I controlled what happened next. Maybe, I said slowly, we can find a way to move forward. But it's going to take time. She looked up at me, hope flickering in her tear-filled eyes. I'll do anything, George. Anything. I nodded, squeezing her hand gently. We'll see. She didn't realize it, but I had no intention of ever forgiving her. I was done playing the supportive husband. Now, it was time for the final act. Jennifer was already broken, but there was one more thing I needed to take from her, her sense of control over her own life. She thought she could fix things, that she could still have me. But I wasn't hers anymore. I hadn't been for a long time. And soon, she would know that too. As the weeks passed, Jennifer's behavior became more erratic. She clung to me, more desperate than ever to prove her loyalty, her devotion. She went out of her way to be the perfect wife, cooking elaborate meals, cleaning the house obsessively, and even surprising me with small gifts and gestures. It was almost pitiful, but no matter what she did, it wasn't enough. She could feel it too, the growing distance between us. She had no idea that I had been slowly pulling away, that I had already emotionally checked out of our marriage long before her affair with Robert. I knew the time was right for the final reveal. The ultimate betrayal. She needed to understand that the power she thought she had over me was long gone, and that I had been in control all along. One night, after dinner, I asked her to sit down with me in the living room. I could see the confusion in her eyes as I sat across from her, my face serious. There's something I need to tell you, I began, my voice steady. Jennifer's face paled, her body tensing as she braced herself for what I was about to say. I know about you and Robert, I said calmly. I've known for months. Her mouth opened slightly, her face crumpling in shock. George, I cut her off, holding up a hand. I don't want to hear excuses. I know everything, Jennifer. I know how long it's been going on. I know why you did it. But the worst part is that you thought I was too stupid to figure it out. Tears welled up in her eyes, and she tried to speak, but the words caught in her throat. I never meant to hurt you. George, but you did, I replied, my voice hardening. You shattered the trust we had. And for what? Some meaningless affair with our family doctor? Jennifer broke down, sobbing into her hands, but I felt nothing. No pity, no remorse. She had made her choices, and now she was paying the price. There's more, I said after a moment, my voice cold and distant. I've been watching you fall apart, watching as you lose your friends, your career, your entire life. She looked up at me, her tear-streaked face filled with confusion. What are you talking about? I leaned forward, my eyes locking onto hers. It wasn't an accident, Jennifer. I made sure it all happened. I've been playing you from the start, manipulating your friendships, planting doubts at work, and pulling Robert out of your life when you needed him most. Her face turned white as the realization hit her. No, you couldn't have. I did, I said, my voice steady and calm. You thought you were in control, but you weren't. I've been orchestrating everything. And now you have nothing left. Jennifer stared at me, her entire world crumbling before her eyes. She tried to speak, but no words came out. The weight of everything I had said pressed down on her like a ton of bricks, suffocating her. You destroyed us, Jennifer, I continued, standing up and walking toward the door. Now you have to live with the consequences. As I left the room, I could hear her sobbing behind me, her entire body shaking with grief and regret. For the first time in months, I felt free. The game was over. Jennifer had been destroyed, and there was nothing left for her to cling to. No friends, no career, no husband. She was truly alone, and I had one. The days after my revelation passed in silence. Jennifer barely spoke, and when she did, her voice was hollow, like she was talking to herself more than to me. The house felt like a graveyard, a place where the remnants of our marriage still lingered but had no life left in them. I watched her carefully, always from a distance, knowing that I had finally broken her in a way no one else ever could. She was a ghost now, floating through the motions of life. The woman who once commanded rooms with confidence, who had always been in control, was gone. What remained was a fragile, shattered version of her former self. I had taken everything from her, and she had nowhere to turn. One evening, as I sat at the kitchen table with a glass of whiskey, she entered the room. Her eyes were puffy from days of crying, and her body seemed smaller, like the weight of everything was physically pressing down on her. "George," she whispered, standing in the doorway. I didn't look at her right away. I let the silence stretch out, the tension hanging between us. Finally, I glanced up at her, raising my glass slightly in a mock salute. "Yes?" She hesitated, wringing her hands together nervously as if she was afraid of what she was about to say. I can't do this anymore." I took a slow sip of the whiskey, savoring the burn as it slid down my throat. "What do you mean?" She stepped further into the room, her eyes filling with tears again. "I mean, I can't live like this. I can't live with what I've done. With what you've done. It's too much." I set the glass down on the table and leaned back in my chair, watching her carefully. She looked fragile, like she was standing on the edge of a cliff and ready to jump. Part of me wanted to push her over the edge, just to see how far she'd fall. But another part of me, the part that had once loved her, felt something else. Not pity, exactly, but a strange sense of finality. This was the end of something that had been inevitable for a long time. "You're right," I said quietly. "It is too much." She stared at me, her face crumpling with emotion. "I've lost everything, George. I've lost my friends, my career, and I've lost you." I didn't respond immediately. I let her words hang in the air, heavy with the weight of the truth. She was right, she had lost everything. And while a part of me felt satisfaction in seeing her broken, another part of me couldn't help but feel a strange emptiness. I had won the game, but the victory felt hollow. In destroying her, I had also destroyed any part of us that had once been real. "I don't know how to fix this," she said, her voice trembling. "I don't know if it can be fixed." "It can't," I replied, my voice cold and final. "There's nothing left to fix, Jennifer. Whatever we had, it's over." Her body shook with sobs, but I didn't move to comfort her. I had nothing left to give her. Not forgiveness, not love, not even anger. I was done. She wiped her eyes with the back of her hand, her face red and blotchy. I think I need to leave." I nodded slowly. "Maybe that's for the best." She didn't argue. She just stood there for a moment, as if waiting for me to stop her, to tell her that things could go back to the way they were. But I stayed silent, and after a few long seconds, she turned and walked out of the kitchen. I listened as she moved through the house, gathering what little she could in a daze. The sound of drawers opening and closing, the quiet rustle of clothes being packed into a suitcase. It was the soundtrack to the end of our life together. It felt surreal, watching everything unravel after so many years of being together. But it wasn't painful. Not for me. I had made my peace with the end long ago. An hour later, Jennifer appeared at the front door, a single suitcase by her side. She looked at me one last time, her eyes red but resolute. "I'm sorry," she whispered, her voice barely audible. I didn't respond. I just nodded, and with that, she turned and left, the door closing softly behind her. For a moment, I stood there in the empty hallway, the silence of the house pressing in around me. The game was over. Jennifer was gone, and with her, any remnants of the life we had built together. I had thought I would feel more triumphant. I had played her, manipulated her, and taken everything from her. But as I stood there alone, I realized that the victory was hollow. In winning the game, I also lost something. Not her. Jennifer was a stranger to me now, but something deeper. Maybe a part of myself. I walked back into the living room and sank down onto the couch, staring at the empty glass on the coffee table. The silence of the house was deafening now. There was no more Jennifer, no more lies, no more games. Just me and the empty spaces she had left behind. And in that silence, for the first time, I wondered if I had been wrong. Not about Jennifer. I didn't regret what I had done to her. She had deserved it, every bit of it. But I wondered if in destroying her, I had also destroyed something inside myself that I hadn't even realized was there. The game was over, but the cost of winning lingered in the quiet. And for the first time, I felt alone. Truly, completely alone. The first few days after Jennifer left were quiet. Unnaturally quiet. It was strange how quickly life could change. One moment you're living in the chaos of a marriage falling apart, filled with tension and deceit, and the next, everything is still. Empty. As if the chaos had never existed at all. I'd sit at the kitchen table, staring at the seat across from me where she used to sit. The coffee cup she always left half full was gone, and the fridge was no longer stocked with her favorite yogurt or that overpriced kombucha she swore by. The silence was oppressive, wrapping around me like a thick fog. At first, I thought the quiet would feel like victory. I had played the long game and won. I had taken down her circle, ruined her reputation, and torn apart the life she had built. And she'd walked away without so much as a fight in the end. But the quiet didn't feel like victory. It felt like something else entirely. It felt like I had severed the last connection I had to my old life, to the person I used to be. I wasn't sure who I was anymore. The man who had spent months plotting his wife's downfall now had no one left to fight. I went through the motions. I still went to work. I still saw friends. I smiled when I had to, and laughed when it was expected, but something inside me had gone hollow. I was starting to realize that, in my obsession with tearing down Jennifer's life, I had stripped away any sense of purpose from my own. It was ironic. I had won, but in the process, I had destroyed any semblance of a life I could return to. Weeks passed, and Jennifer's absence became a dull ache in the background of my days. I never reached out to her, never checked on her. I wasn't interested in where she went or how she was doing. She was gone, and that chapter of my life was closed. But one evening, as I was cleaning up around the house, I found something I hadn't expected, an old photo album. It was tucked away in the back of the bookshelf, hidden behind a stack of forgotten books. It had been years since I'd looked at it, probably longer than I cared to admit. I pulled it out and sat down on the couch, flipping through the pages. It was our life before everything went wrong. Photos of our early days together, when we were still happy. When I thought we had everything. There were pictures from our first vacation, smiling on a beach in California. Jennifer's arm around my shoulder, her head resting against me as if we were inseparable. There were photos of her laughing at some inside joke that I couldn't remember anymore, her eyes filled with a kind of light that had been missing for years. The further I flipped through the album, the heavier the weight in my chest became. I saw images of our first house, the one we were so proud to buy together, and memories of parties with friends who had long since disappeared. There were holiday gatherings, moments with family, snapshots of a life that felt so distant now. And then I saw a photo that stopped me cold. It was from our wedding. Jennifer and I, standing at the altar, her smile so wide and genuine, her eyes filled with love. My own face, looking back at her with an expression I hadn't seen in myself for a long time, hope. I closed the album, the weight of the past pressing down on me. I didn't know what I was expecting, going through those memories. Maybe some sort of closure, or maybe just a reminder of why I had started down this path in the first place. But instead, I felt regret. Not for what I had done to Jennifer. No, I didn't regret exposing her affair or even tearing apart her social circle. She had made her choices, and she had paid for them. But I regretted the man I had become in the process. Somewhere along the way, I had lost myself, consumed by revenge, by the need to win at all costs. The silence of the house pressed in on me again, and I realized something: I wasn't angry anymore. The fury that had driven me for so long was gone, burned out. I didn't care about Jennifer, or Robert, or any of it. All that remained was a kind of numb emptiness. I thought back to the moment I had found out about the affair, the cold shock of betrayal that had turned my world upside down. I had wanted to punish her, to make her feel the pain she had inflicted on me. And I had succeeded. But now, standing at the end of it all, I wondered if I had truly gotten what I wanted. What had I expected? That destroying her would somehow make me whole again? That taking everything from her would heal the wounds she'd left? It hadn't. If anything, I felt more broken now than I had the day I found out. As the days turned into weeks, I found myself more and more withdrawn. Friends reached out, but I pulled away. Work became a monotonous routine, something I did without thinking. The house that once felt like a battlefield now felt like a prison, each room filled with ghosts of the past. One evening, as I sat in the dark living room, the photo album still sitting on the table, I realized something I hadn't been ready to face before. I had won the war, but in the process, I had lost myself. Jennifer had taken something from me when she betrayed me, but it wasn't just the trust we had shared. It was the version of myself that believed in the future, that believed in love. In seeking revenge, I had let that part of myself die, and now I was left with nothing but the ashes of the life I had burned down. The victory I thought I wanted had left me hollow, and for the first time, I wasn't sure if I could live with the emptiness. I had destroyed Jennifer, but in the end, the real casualty had been me. The realization that I had lost more than I had won didn't come all at once. It crept in slowly like a shadow growing darker with each passing day. It was a strange, hollow feeling, knowing that I had finally achieved everything I set out to do but still felt as if something crucial had slipped through my fingers. The days blurred together as I went through the motions of life, each one feeling more disconnected than the last. Jennifer hadn't tried to contact me since she left, and I hadn't reached out to her. I suppose that was how it was supposed to end. A clean break. No lingering fights, no drawn-out explanations. But the finality of it gnawed at me. I thought back to the man I had been before all of this began. Before the lies, before the betrayal, before my slow descent into manipulation and revenge. I wondered if that man still existed somewhere beneath the layers of resentment and bitterness, or if he was gone forever, consumed by the game I had played. The quiet became my constant companion. The house was too big, too empty, but I couldn't bring myself to change anything. I didn't move Jennifer's things, didn't rearrange the furniture, or throw out any reminders of her presence. It was as if I was frozen in time, stuck in the aftermath of everything I had done. The irony wasn't lost on me. I had gotten rid of her, but I couldn't escape the pieces of her that still lingered. One evening, I found myself sitting in the same chair I had been in the night she left, staring out the window into the darkness. The whiskey was still my companion, though its burn didn't comfort me the way it used to. The house felt more like a mausoleum now. A place where our marriage had died, and I was left to haunt the ruins. A knock at the door startled me, pulling me out of my thoughts. It was late, far too late for visitors, and for a brief moment, I wondered if it was Jennifer, coming back to reclaim what she had lost. But that was wishful thinking, wasn't it? I stood up, my body heavy, and made my way to the door. When I opened it, I was met with an unexpected face, Robert. The last person I ever expected to see standing on my doorstep. He looked different, more haggard than I remembered. His usual polished demeanor was gone, replaced by dark circles under his eyes and a tension in his shoulders that made him look older than he was. "George," he said, his voice tired but steady. "We need to talk." I stared at him for a moment, unsure whether to laugh or slam the door in his face. Of all the people to show up in the aftermath, it had to be him. "I'm not sure we have anything left to say to each other," I replied coldly. My hand still on the doorknob. He shifted uncomfortably, glancing down before meeting my eyes again. "I know you have every reason to hate me. I deserve that, but this isn't about me. It's about Jennifer." The sound of her name sent a cold shock through me, but I kept my expression neutral. "What about her?" Robert took a deep breath, his face grim. "She's not okay, George. She's falling apart." I stepped back, the sudden rush of anger and disbelief hitting me. "Why should I care? She made her bed. Robert, she can lie in it." "I know," he said quickly, his voice softening. "But it's worse than you think. She's completely isolated. She has no friends left, her career is in ruins, and she's spiraling. I thought maybe you." "What? You thought maybe I could save her?" I interrupted, my voice sharp with disbelief. "After everything she did? After everything you did?" Robert winced, but he didn't back down. "I'm not asking for your forgiveness. I know I don't deserve that. But I thought maybe you'd want to know. Maybe you'd want to do something before it's too late." I felt a surge of conflicting emotions, anger, bitterness, guilt. But above all, I felt tired. Tired of the games, tired of the revenge, tired of being the one in control. I had destroyed Jennifer, but now hearing that she was completely lost, something twisted inside me. "What do you expect me to do, Robert?" I asked, my voice low. "You think I can fix her? That I even want to?" "I don't know," he admitted. "But I think, deep down, you care. Maybe more than you realize." I stared at him, my mind spinning. Robert was right. I had spent so long pretending I didn't care, convincing myself that my only goal was to win, to break Jennifer as she had broken me. But now, with nothing left but the ruins of our lives, I wasn't so sure anymore. "Where is she?" I asked after a long pause, my voice barely above a whisper. Robert let out a breath, relief washing over his face. She's staying at a motel just outside of town. Room 215. I nodded, closing the door behind me without another word. I didn't know why I was doing this. Maybe it was guilt. Maybe it was the remnants of love I had buried deep down. Or maybe it was the realization that in trying to destroy Jennifer, I had lost more of myself than I had ever intended. I drove in silence, the weight of everything pressing down on me. The road stretched out before me, dark and endless, just like the mess I had created. When I arrived at the motel, it was just as bleak as I imagined, a rundown place on the outskirts of town. The kind of place where people went when they had nowhere else to go. I found room 215 easily enough. My heart pounded in my chest as I stood in front of the door, unsure of what I would find on the other side. The part of me that had wanted revenge was still there, but it had dulled, replaced by something I couldn't quite name. I knocked softly, and after a moment, the door opened. Jennifer stood there, her face pale and gaunt, her eyes hollow. She looked like a shadow of the woman I once knew. For a long moment, we just stared at each other. No words, no accusations. Just silence. Finally, she stepped back, allowing me to enter. And as I crossed the threshold into the dim, claustrophobic room, I realized this wasn't just the end of Jennifer and me. This was the beginning of something else. But whether it was redemption or the final step into the void, I still didn't know. As I stepped into the motel room, the weight of the past few months came crashing down on me. The room was dimly lit, the air thick with the smell of stale cigarettes and cheap perfume. Jennifer was standing near the window, her back turned to me, staring out into the darkness. She looked like a ghost. The woman I had once known was now barely a shadow of herself. "Why are you here, George?" Her voice was quiet, but it was laced with a mixture of exhaustion and defeat. She didn't turn around to face me. I closed the door behind me and leaned against it, unsure of what to say. The words that had driven me here felt heavy on my tongue. Impossible to form. Part of me didn't even know why I was here. Was it guilt? Pity? Some last remnant of love? I wasn't sure anymore. "I don't know," I admitted, my voice hollow. "Robert came to see me. Told me you were struggling." She laughed bitterly, her shoulders shaking with it. Struggling? That's one way to put it. Another would be to say my life is in ruins. Her words hung in the air like a thick fog. I looked around the room. There were empty takeout containers on the small table, clothes strewn across the bed, and the remains of what looked like a bottle of wine on the nightstand. It was clear she wasn't doing well, and the sight of it twisted something deep inside me. Jennifer finally turned to face me, her eyes sunken and red. "You got what you wanted, didn't you? You won. You destroyed everything I had. So why are you here now? To gloat? To see the final wreckage?" I swallowed hard, shaking my head. "No, I'm not here for that." She stepped closer, her expression dark, almost desperate. "Then why, George? Why? After everything, why now?" Her words cut through me, each one a reminder of what I had done, of the person I had become in my quest for revenge. I had wanted to break her, and I had. But standing here now, seeing what was left of her, I wasn't sure I could live with what I had done. "I don't know," I repeated, my voice softer now. "I thought destroying you would make me feel whole again. That it would give me back some kind of control over my life. But now, I just feel empty." Jennifer's eyes flickered with something, maybe recognition, maybe anger, but she didn't respond. She just stood there, watching me, waiting for me to continue. "I wanted to hurt you the way you hurt me," I said, my words spilling out before I could stop them. "When I found out about you and Robert, it tore me apart. I didn't know how to deal with it. So I did the only thing I knew how to do, I fought back. I made it my mission to ruin you. And I did. But now, I don't know if I can live with what I've done." Jennifer stared at me for a long moment, her face unreadable. Then, slowly, she walked over to the small table and sat down. She looked up at me, her eyes filled with a kind of quiet resignation. "Do you think this is what I wanted?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "Do you think I planned for any of this? That I wanted to betray you? I was lost, George. We were lost. And Robert, he was just an escape. A terrible, selfish escape." I didn't say anything. I didn't know what to say. The woman sitting in front of me was no longer the person I had once loved, and I wasn't the man I had been either. We were strangers now, bound only by the wreckage of our past. I know I don't deserve your forgiveness, Jennifer continued, her eyes fixed on the floor. But I never wanted things to end like this. I never wanted us to destroy each other. Her words hit me hard, a painful reminder of how far we had fallen. I had spent so long trying to win, trying to prove that I was right, that I had lost sight of everything else. I had become consumed by the need to hurt her, and in the process, I had hurt myself more than I could have ever imagined. I don't know if there's anything left to save, I said, my voice barely audible. Maybe there never was. Jennifer looked up at me then, her eyes filled with tears. Maybe not, but what do we do now? I didn't have an answer for her. The road that had led us here had been long and twisted. And now we were standing at the end of it, facing the consequences of everything we had done. There was no easy way out. No clean slate. Just the cold, hard truth that we had destroyed something that could never be rebuilt. But as I stood there, staring at the woman I had once promised to love forever, I realized that maybe there was something we could salvage. Not our marriage. That was gone, burned to ashes long ago. But maybe, just maybe, we could find a way to forgive each other. To let go of the hatred and the bitterness that had consumed us. I don't know what's next, I said quietly. But I think we need to stop trying to hurt each other. We've done enough damage. Jennifer nodded slowly, her tears finally spilling over. I think you're right. We sat in silence for a long time, the weight of everything we had done settling over us. There were no easy answers, no quick fixes. But in that moment, something shifted. It wasn't forgiveness, not yet. But it was the beginning of something that felt like a step toward healing. As I left the motel that night, the cool night air filling my lungs, I felt lighter. Not because the pain was gone, it wasn't, but because I had finally let go of the need to win. The need to destroy. For the first time in a long time, I felt like maybe, just maybe, I could find a way to move on. And as I drove away, leaving Jennifer behind in that motel room, I realized that the real battle hadn't been with her. It had been with myself. And maybe now, I could finally start to win that fight.